There are moments in sports that don't need a press conference. They don't need an announcement, a graphic, or a breaking news chyron crawling across the bottom of your screen. They just happen, right there, on the field, in front of everyone. And by the time it's over, everybody in the building knows exactly what they just witnessed. Day 1 of the Cleveland Browns' mandatory minicamp was one of those moments. And if you weren't paying attention, you missed the exact second that a quarterback competition stopped being a competition. Because what Shedeur Sanders did on that field wasn't just impressive, it wasn't just a good day at practice, it was a statement delivered in the most direct language that football allows, through arm talent, through poise, through precision, and through the kind of quiet, unshakable confidence that you simply cannot manufacture in a meeting room or a film session. You either have it or you don't. And on day 1 of mandatory minicamp, Shedeur Sanders made it crystal clear to every single person watching, coaches, teammates, media, doubters, that he has it in abundance. The Cleveland Browns have been searching for a franchise quarterback for what feels like a lifetime. Decades of hope and heartbreak, of maybe this is the guy, followed by the inevitable collapse. The fan base has been through it all. The false starts, the recycled veterans, the draft busts, the what-ifs. So when a quarterback walks onto that practice field and starts doing things that make the entire sideline stop and stare, it means something different in Cleveland than it might anywhere else. It lands differently. It hits harder. And what Shedeur Sanders delivered on day 1 of mandatory minicamp hit harder than anything this franchise has felt at the quarterback position in a very long time. But to truly understand why this moment matters as much as it does, you have to understand the climate that surrounded it. You have to understand what the narrative looked like going in, because that context is what makes what happened so significant. Going into mandatory minicamp, the Cleveland media landscape was, to put it generously, divided. There was a segment that had already seen enough from Shedeur Sanders during the OTA sessions to feel confident about where this was heading. The throws were sharp, the command was evident, and the trajectory was pointing in one direction. But there was another segment, a vocal one, that was still pumping the brakes, still suggesting that the competition was genuinely open, still floating the idea that Deshaun Watson had a realistic path back to the starting role. Now, let's be honest about something. The idea that Deshaun Watson, coming off the kind of injury history and performance decline that defined his last few seasons in Cleveland, was a legitimate threat to take the starting quarterback job from Shedeur Sanders, was, to a lot of people, more of a media narrative than a football reality. But narratives have power, especially when they're being pushed by voices with platforms and audiences, and one of the loudest voices still entertaining that storyline heading into minicamp was Mary Kay Cabot. For those unfamiliar, Mary Kay Cabot is one of the most prominent Cleveland Browns beat reporters in the business. She has covered this franchise for decades. Her access is unmatched, her knowledge of the organization runs deep, and when she speaks about the Browns, people listen. So when she was out there consistently suggesting that the quarterback competition was more open than it appeared, that Watson couldn't be counted out, that Shedeur still had things to prove, those words carried weight. They kept the doubt alive. They gave the skeptics something to point to. And then, day 1 of mandatory minicamp happened, and all of that changed. From the moment Shedeur Sanders stepped onto that field, something was different. You could feel it before he even threw his first pass. There was a sharpness to the way he carried himself. Not arrogance, not showmanship, but the calm, collected energy of someone who knew the work that was done. He walked into that building, took every first-team rep that was available, and from the opening snap, made it impossible to watch anyone else on that field. The coaching staff didn't need to ease him in. There was no easing in. He was operating with the first-team offense from the jump, and every single rep looked like a quarterback who had been running this offense for years. His footwork was clean. His eyes were moving through progressions the way a veteran reads a defense, not with hesitation, not with confusion, but with the kind of smooth, rhythmic decision-making that separates the guys who think about what to do from the guys who just know. And here's the thing about poise at the quarterback position. You can coach mechanics, you can coach footwork, you can coach release points and reading coverages, but you cannot coach poise. You cannot drill it into someone. Either a quarterback has the innate ability to slow the game down, to operate with calmness when everything around him is moving fast, or he doesn't. And what Shedeur Sanders showed in every single rep of that practice session was that he possesses that quality at a level that you rarely see in a young quarterback. Every throw had conviction, every drop back had purpose, every decision was made with the certainty of someone who was exactly where he was supposed to be. The sideline noticed, teammates noticed, the coaching staff noticed, and most importantly, the people who had been questioning whether this young man was ready for this moment noticed too, whether they wanted to or not. But if there was one sequence during that practice session that permanently closed the door on this quarterback debate, it was the back-to-back throws that Shedeur Sanders produced early in the session. 2 throws, back-to-back, each one more impressive than the last, and together they told the entire story of what kind of quarterback is now under center for the Cleveland Browns. The first was a touchdown pass to Denzel Boston in the red zone, and before you picture some easy slant route to a safe check down to a back out of the backfield, let's be very clear about what this throw actually was. Shedeur dropped back, surveyed the defense with the composure of someone who has been playing quarterback in big moments their entire life, identified the window, and launched the ball into a space that only the most elite quarterbacks in this league can hit on a consistent basis, and Denzel Boston, without breaking stride, hauled it in for the score. The window was tight, the placement was perfect, the timing was exactly right, and the way Shedeur stood in the pocket, processed everything happening in front of him, and delivered the ball with that kind of precision in the red zone, where there is no margin for error, spoke volumes about where his game currently sits. That throw alone would have been enough to make headlines. That throw alone would have been enough to fuel a week's worth of conversation about the state of this quarterback competition. But Shedeur Sanders wasn't done. Almost immediately after that red zone touchdown strike, he stepped back and launched a Hail Mary-style deep ball down the field to Isaiah Bond, and Isaiah Bond caught it. Think about that sequence for a moment. Red zone precision touchdown, pinpoint placement in a tight window, followed immediately by a full-field deep shot that demonstrated the kind of arm talent and range that Browns fans have been waiting for years to see from someone taking snaps under center. Those 2 throws, back-to-back, in the opening portion of mandatory minicamp, said everything. The range was there, the touch was there, the confidence was there, and the results were right there for everyone to see. If there was anyone still holding on to the idea that this quarterback competition had genuine uncertainty attached to it after that sequence, they were holding on to it out of stubbornness, not out of any honest football evaluation. What made day 1 of minicamp even more revealing wasn't just the big splash throws, it wasn't just the touchdown to Boston or the deep ball to Bond, it was everything in between. It was the quieter moments, the routine reps, the split-second decisions made in the middle of a practice session that don't necessarily end up in the highlight package, but tell you more about a quarterback's readiness than any single spectacular throw ever could.
And nowhere was that more evident than in the chemistry that Shedeur Sanders put on display with running back Quinshon Judkins. Because what those two showed in that practice session was something that typically takes quarterbacks and their backfield options years of working together to develop. The kind of timing and understanding that makes a running back an extension of a quarterback's decision-making process. Not just a check-down option, but a genuine weapon in the passing game. Shedeur wasn't throwing to where Judkins was, he was throwing to where Judkins was going to be. That distinction sounds small, but it is the difference between a quarterback who reacts and a quarterback who anticipates. And anticipatory throwing is one of the rarest and most valuable skills that a franchise quarterback can possess. It means the quarterback is reading the route as it develops, processing the leverage of the defender, and releasing the football at the exact moment that puts it in the precise location where the receiver arrives a half second later. Done right, it looks effortless. Done wrong, it results in incompletions, or worse. Shedeur was doing it right, repeatedly throughout the session. Every route combination coming out of the backfield, every timing concept designed to get Judkins involved as a receiver, Shedeur was on top of it, ahead of it, executing it with the kind of precision that had coaches and teammates around him marveling at the level of preparation and football IQ being demonstrated in front of their eyes. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't one good rep in the middle of a mediocre practice. This was a sustained, consistent, high-level performance from start to finish. And when you combine the deep ball capability with the red zone precision, with the short to intermediate connection with the running back chemistry, what you're left with is a complete picture of a quarterback who is genuinely ready to lead an NFL offense. Here's something that a lot of the coverage of this minicamp performance missed, or at least glossed over. None of this started at mandatory minicamp. Day one didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't a sudden emergence or an unexpected breakout. It was the latest chapter in a story that had been building steadily, consistently through every single OTA session that came before it. Go back and look at how Shedeur Sanders was performing during those voluntary workouts. Look at the throws he was making in a practice environment where he was going head-to-head with Deshaun Watson in real time, competing for the same reps, throwing to the same receivers, operating under the same coaching staff's watchful eye. The velocity was there, the placement was there, the decision-making under simulated pressure was pointing in one direction and one direction only. Anyone who was watching those OTA sessions with honest eyes, without an agenda, without a narrative to protect, could see exactly where this was going. The mandatory minicamp wasn't a revelation, it was a confirmation. It was the moment where everything that had been building over the course of the OTA sessions crystallized into undeniable, impossible-to-dismiss evidence that the Cleveland Browns have found their quarterback. The trajectory was already established. Minicamp just made it official in the most public way possible. And that's what made it so significant for the people who had been downplaying that trajectory. Because you can wave off a good OTA practice. You can say it's early, you can say the pads aren't on, you can say Watson will get it together when the setting becomes more formal. But when mandatory minicamp arrives and the exact same story plays out, with even more conviction, even more sharpness, even more command, you run out of places to hide. The narrative has nowhere left to go. Shedeur Sanders had been building to this moment for weeks. Day one of mandatory minicamp was simply where it became impossible to look away. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Or more accurately, the elephant sitting in the front row of the bleachers at mandatory minicamp, watching every single throw with the full knowledge that what was unfolding in front of her was directly contradicting the position she had been publicly taking for weeks. Mary Kay Cabot was there, front row, watching.
And according to every account from people who were in attendance, the experience put her in the most uncomfortable professional position she has occupied throughout the entire duration of this quarterback competition. Because here is what Mary Kay Cabot had been doing leading up to minicamp. She had been one of the most consistent voices suggesting that this competition was genuinely open, that Deshaun Watson had a realistic path back to the starting role, that Shedeur Sanders still had things to prove, but the questions surrounding his readiness were legitimate, that Cleveland fans shouldn't get ahead of themselves when it came to anointing the young quarterback as their guy. Those were the takes. Those were the positions she was staking out publicly, using her platform, using her credibility as someone who has covered this organization for decades. And there is something that has to be acknowledged here. She is not a bad reporter. She is not someone who was acting in bad faith. She was doing what reporters covering a competitive situation do, which is present multiple possible outcomes and resist the temptation to call the story before it's officially been written. But the story was being written right in front of her on day one of mandatory minicamp. Rep by rep, throw by throw, the evidence was piling up in a way that left no room for the alternative narrative she had been maintaining. And when even she, one of the most determined voices of measured skepticism around Shedeur Sanders, had no choice but to come out and say that he won the day, that despite a practice that had some ragged stretches overall, Shedeur Sanders made the play of the session and did what he needed to do, that acknowledgement meant something.
It wasn't just a reporter updating her take based on new information, it was the last significant voice of doubt in the Cleveland media, acknowledging publicly that the competition has shifted in a way that can no longer be reasonably contested. And the fact that she had to deliver that acknowledgement while sitting in the front row, having watched it happen with her own eyes, made it land with a particular weight. The skeptics had to watch every throw, every single one, and what they saw was a young quarterback dismantling their doubts in real time with no mercy and no hesitation. So where does that leave us? What does all of this mean for the Cleveland Browns going forward? And what does it mean for Shedeur Sanders as a player, as a prospect, and as the man who is now clearly positioned to be the face of this franchise? It means that after decades, literal decades of searching, stumbling, cycling through quarterbacks the way other teams cycle through backup special teamers, the Cleveland Browns may have finally, actually, genuinely found their guy. Not a stopgap, not a bridge, not a let's see how this goes for a couple of seasons situation. A real, legitimate franchise quarterback who has the arm talent, the poise, the football intelligence, and the competitive fire to lead this organization into a new era. The OTA performances told you that. The Day 1 Minicamp performance confirmed it. The chemistry with his weapons is already developing at a pace that should have this fan base excited about the ceiling of what this offense can become. The deep ball capability is real, the red zone precision is real, the anticipatory throwing is real, and perhaps most importantly, the mental makeup, the ability to operate without flinching under pressure, to perform at your best when the spotlight is brightest, to deliver when the moment demands it, that is real too. Shedeur Sanders didn't just win a practice, he didn't just have a good day and give the Cleveland media something to talk about for a news cycle. He walked into that building on day 1 of mandatory minicamp and did what franchise quarterbacks do. He took control, he performed, and he made it impossible for anyone watching to imagine someone else in that role. The quarterback debate in Cleveland is over. It wasn't close. It wasn't a photo finish. It was a young man stepping onto a football field and announcing, without a single word, that he belongs, that this is his team, that the wait is over. The Shedeur Sanders era in Cleveland has officially begun. And for a city that has endured more quarterback heartbreak than perhaps any other in the history of professional football, the feeling that comes with watching that first-team offense move in rhythm behind a quarterback who clearly, undeniably has what it takes, that feeling is something else entirely. The doubters had front-row seats. The proof was delivered right in front of them, and now there is simply nothing left to debate.